evening and welcome to another edition of The Trending Mind. This is The Trending Mind 2222. And as always, we've got a very interesting conversation for you this evening. We'll be back in just a minute. What is knowledge? And how much of it must we acquire in order to better our lives? What makes some forms of knowledge seemingly more advantageous than others? What fuels this desire to learn and to know and to understand? And how much of what we learn is actually applied to the bettering of our lives? Is it necessary to know in order to grow? Join us, a group of former Guyanese high schoolers and our special guests, as we chat about the things we need to know and about education and the process of learning in the tech age. This is The Trending Mind, Friday evenings at 7:30 Eastern Standard Time on Facebook and YouTube. Okay, good night again and welcome, Jillian.
Good night.
How are you?
I'm good.
All right. Yes, thank you all for joining us again. This evening we'll be taking a look at loneliness. Before we go there, we want to explore the theme of... Good night, Dr. Blackman.
Good night.
We want to explore the theme of laziness. Now, Compton, we will start with you. Are there benefits to laziness in the human existence, in our sphere?
Laziness, one could say yes. Because what I'm not thinking of laziness, but I'm thinking of maybe downtime where you quote unquote do nothing, where the body is at rest and at that time can regenerate itself. So that is what I would term in terms of quote unquote laziness. Where the body's at rest and allowing yourself to regenerate.
Okay. Antoine, are there any benefits to laziness? Is it when is laziness good?
Well, I was just gonna ask if you really wanted me to go right after Compton, but I can take the bite. I can bite the bullet and go loud. First of all, we have to understand what laziness is. We have to understand the definition, the construct of what laziness is. There's a socio-cultural construct surrounding laziness. And laziness is rooted in a construct that says we must always be working, that we must always be producing and we must be productive. If we stop doing that, then we are being lazy. We are not we are counterproductive. We are not providing and supplying and supporting the community. Okay? Understand that. But let us take a step back and look at maybe some of the other synonyms that we use for laziness, especially in a Guyanese culture. Boredom, are just there. Okay? I ain't feel like doing nothing today. Okay? I ain't feel like talking to nobody today. I have a task to do, but I left it for next time. I ain't feel like doing that now. And so we judge someone who may be taking some time away to collect their thoughts, to process things, to internalize, and to gather themselves from the outside. We judge that person as being lazy. We determine that somebody who is, in our perception of laziness, is not worthwhile spending time with or spending time on. But let us ask ourselves the question, and I'm sure that many of the professors and the educators here will understand the benefits of taking a step back from the world. When we look up at the clouds and we would just daydream, we would go by the seawall and sit down, not out to the jetty all the way by the Damara River behind where they had Lokuso and Pool, not all the way out there. Because that's a different story. But you go out by Kitty Seawall and you sit down. Or you go by yourself and you sit down in the Botanic Gardens or the Promenade Gardens. And I don't mean go behind a bush and look and peep at nobody. But you spend time by yourself. The words we use to describe laziness is lethargy, ennui, maybe even a don't care attitude. But is that really what it is? When all we might be content with at that moment is just to be by ourselves, to collect ourselves, so we can then figure out what our next step would be. But no, we are not allowed that time, because instead we are so driven, and I will link that again to our subject for tonight.
Right.
But I will link that also with slavery. That we are driven to keep producing, to keep working, driving all the time, 6-7 days a week, 24/7. That the minute we stop and we step back, we are seen not by our employers or masters, but even by our own families as lazy, because we are not contributing to the production that we're all supposed to be engaged in. Don't we say that about artists? We don't often recognize fine artists or even dancers or musicians. Boy, what you doing with they ain't gonna bring in no money? That's laziness. Or you see a boy who wants to cook or wants to become an interior decorator. Where's the auntie, man? What kind of laziness is there? You understand? That's all for now.
All right. Thank you, Antoine. Michelle, within your field, education. Is that term ever used to describe anything at all? Laziness. Do you ever use that term?
Yes. Laziness is used in education, and there are lazy people in education. But I'm glad that Antoine raised the issue of culture, because culture does play in, and we forget about mindfulness and time that people need to recuperate in order to move forward with something and in order to be their best selves. Because what we do is think that these are machines, and even machines don't go around the clock, but we feel as though they're machines and they can keep going around the clock and around the clock, not recognizing that the output is less. But there's another term for laziness, which we're talking about someone who's unwilling to do work. So you're coming to work, you're here to do a job, or you're refusing to do any kind of work. And that type of laziness can also be tied to mental illness, because the person may be feeling withdrawn, person may be feeling some type of depression, so they don't want to do anything. And if I think back to our culture, I believe that we may have had several persons who may have felt this way, and they may have been going through things, but we just put them into a category of being lazy rather than give them support that they may need, because of different experiences that they may have. So I know I have a task to do, but I refuse to do the task. I'm not going to go and do it. I don't feel like doing it. I know I have to. This is different to me from I've done my share, completed my 8 hours of work, but you want me to do 12 hours while you pay me for 8 hours, and I really need to take time to decompress, to really, think about other things, to deal with self-care. we didn't know about self-care back home. So anything that you do along that line would have been considered laziness.
Okay. Jillian, those moments when you walk into the kitchen, um, maybe look at the sink and decide, you know, I'm not dealing with this at this time. Um, what do those lazy moments mean for you, and how do you use those lazy moments, as we would call it?
Okay, so I don't use the word lazy for those moments. Like Dr. Leward just said, self care. I would
Mm,
use the word self care. When I think of laziness, I think of someone who is there, who has to do a job and is not motivated to do it, don't want to do it, is not putting in their part, and they just refuse, idle time, not doing anything. That's when I would use the word lazy. But to take some time off to regroup, to self-care, to rest, to relax after pushing in a full day's work or whatever, I do not use the term lazy there, because some days you just need to take a break. I call it taking a break. Sometimes you just need to leave everything alone, take a break, and regroup. But for me, laziness is people who are just totally unproductive when they should be paid. Somebody's being paid for a task, or there's an expectation of this person to fulfill this project or whatever, and they choose not to do it because of lack of motivation or whatever is causing them not to do what they have to do. So that's how I
right.
look at laziness, as against a bit of relaxation, leisure, self-care.
Okay. Thank you, Jillian. Dr. Blackman, so we have the six of us, and we've been washing our clothing with our hands, and Michelle can't deal with that, right? She can't deal with this hand washing thing and hand washing thing, right? And basically, she's defined as lazy, and year in year out, you can't get Michelle to wash. But then one day, Michelle comes up and creates a washing machine. In the field of science, mathematics, how do we define someone like Michelle, Dr. Blackman?
Yeah, so that was exactly what I was going to bring to you. It's traditional setup. Laziness is like people who are, as Jillian just, the people unwilling to work. They don't want to use any energy. You find them taking regular breaks. And we come up in a kind of Christian sort of world, and they tell us that sloth is one of the seven deadly sins. They tell us this, right? So we come up in a world where as Antoine was saying, if you're not busy, get busy. So we this is the mentality that we that we come to the world with. But like you just said, and this is the point I wanted to make, that you know progress often comes from quote lazy people trying to find an easy way to do something. So in a way, it's exactly what you just articulated, which is there are a bunch of us doing washing clothes by hand at the riverside, and you remember we used to have these the beaters you used to have to, like a scrubbing board and thing that, yeah. So some people would look at this, and Michelle rightly looked at this and said, well, you know what, I don't want to do this, and I want to find a better way to do the washing of clothes, and invent the washing machine, right? So in science, this is actually a very good thing. Often problems don't, the solutions to problems don't come when you're just working all the time. The mind works in two ways. There's a sort of diffuse mode where you just sort of lay back and you're watching, and there's a focus mode where you're kind of in this way. And in order to really get the thing right and get the thing balanced, you have to have the right mix of the diffuse mode and the focus mode. And so this thing that we're calling sort of laziness is often the thing that allows us to enter into this diffuse mode. And when we're in this diffuse mode, this is where the innovation and the creativity will come from. Quite often, it doesn't go, quite often as a person thinking about solving problems, when you work all day, and then finally you get a moment at the end of the day where you sit down. Sometimes when you go lie down, you sleep, you dream, and you finally understand what's going on. You wake up in the morning, and that's when you can write down but the idea for solving the problem very rarely comes to you in the working at this moment. It comes to you in this place where, you think people might perceive as being lazy. And so rather than saying lazy, I think that I was thinking how to say this is strategic laziness. As Julian said, it's the strategic laziness is really what allows us to do the self-care that we need to do. So it's the thing that allows us to be creative. It's the thing that allows us to be innovative and ultimately to be productive. And it's the thing that, whether we like it or not, it's the thing that maintains the mental health. If we're going, the machine, as Dr. Lawrence, will break down, right? And so we have to pause for a moment to let the machine renew itself. And so, I don't think of laziness, but it's strategic laziness. You've got to pause and let the thing regenerate. People often, see, this slacking off as kind of a negative trait, and we come up in a culture where it's a negative trait, but it's not altogether negative. And for those who think about solving problems, that the key thing is that the mind works in these two modes: this focus mode and the diffuse mode. And this diffuse mode is precisely what we tap into when we be a little lazy. So I from time to time will tap into this diffuse mode. I don't want to be called lazy, but it still rankles me if someone says, "Why you lazy?" But I will take a break from time to time.
Right.
Yes.
Terence, but let me just say something. I was just thinking about this. We think about laziness and we're saying it's when you don't want to do work. And then I thought about it from a scientific perspective, where work is defined as force, right?
Yeah.
So
it's just
maybe the
unwilling to work,
machine
to
is
use the
not
energy.
considered right because there's no real force. I don't know. Maybe the machine is not considered work.
Yeah. Well, no, it's just the lazy person, unwilling to use up the energy on, even some things like this. Let me give one. So there's a thing that says, like, okay, there's a total number of heartbeats that this heart can beat, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're working all the time, then you're using up the beats quickly. So you got to slow the thing down so that the beats can extend over an extended period of time, right? So you live longer if you don't use up all the beats today. So you got to slow it and let some beats tomorrow, some beats the next day. And the idea is to get this thing going so that you use up the beats over the longest period of time, while at the same time still being productive. So this laziness is not, like I said, it's strategic laziness. It's not something to trifle with. Yes.
All right. Thank you, Dr. Becker. All right. We're looking at laziness. Loneliness, rather.
Hang on, Andy.
Go
Andy,
ahead.
Good night, everyone.
Hey, Rennie.
Rennie.
I just want to throw another concept of laziness in here that we often don't consider.
Okay.
It is that you find sometimes in academia, when people will do work, but it is not complete, it is not done properly, it is shoddy, it is missing critical or crucial information and detail. It does not. So even from my perspective as a journalist, it's, you're not citing references, you're not doing your work properly. So you're not representing not just your profession, but you're not representing your own self and your integrity. That is laziness. And I know that there is a term, academic laziness, where somebody does not step up and do the kind of rigor and attention to detail and process and methodology that they need to arrive at. And Dr. Blackman, as a scientist, will understand when I talk about somebody setting up a hypothesis and trying to prove or disprove that hypothesis, but being lazy about the process.
Yeah.
Do you understand? But I also want to introduce another kind of develop a little bit on what Dr. Blackman and what Dr. Lord was talking about, is that there is an aspect of laziness which we culturally determine as laziness. It's just simply somebody daydreaming. So let's look back at some of our preeminent intellectuals and scholars and geniuses in our time and previously. How many of them spent time just simply doing nothing? Let's take an example of Henry David Thoreau, okay, from Concord, Massachusetts, right? Concord, New Hampshire, actually. But he spent a lot of time in the forest, living an isolated life. Was he lazy? But then he comes up with this treatise. So how do we then redefine laziness? And is a word that we need to either excise from our lexicon on our vocabulary, or is it a word that when we use it, we need to add a qualifier to say, well, this is what I mean when I say laziness? That's all.
Okay, cool. I think the term is going to come up somewhere along the line as we go deeper into this evening's discussion on loneliness. Michelle, I will drop the first question on you, and then I will take it to Antoine.
No.
We want to begin with a historical figure, and given your reading, your interpretation, Michelle, would you say that the Christ was a lonely man?
It depends on how. So you asked me if I would say that. I would not be bold enough to say that. Would I think so? Yes. Would I think he was lonely? Yes. It depends on. He was ostracized from his people. They didn't want him around. And those are positions where you end up being alone. Everyone was up against him, unless they believed in him with his different miracles and these type of things. But aside from that, he was pretty much alone. The type of loneliness that can put you into a mental state. But then that leaves us wondering about the rest of our history and our belief, which I don't want to start here.
Okay, Antoine. I mean, I know of some of your views, with regard to Christianity, but looking at it from what is written, in the Bible, and given what has been said and has been told about the life of Christ, would you say that he would have been a lonely person? If so, what kind of loneliness would that be identified as?
I think I just got set up, But let me just jump in here. So if anybody want to cut my head off, please come good. It must be a sharp knife. Here is the thing that I think is that an experience of loneliness is a common factor for all of us as humans. Okay? Throughout humanity, loneliness, like mental health, is a common factor of our existence. We all will feel alone. It is possible that the historic Jesus, not the glorified sentimentalized Jesus, the historical Jesus, likely experienced moments of loneliness. As Dr. Lord was saying, it is likely that because of his views, he was seen as an outsider. Because remember, in about between 1 and 33 AD, Judea was under Roman control. So it was an extraordinarily productive, you got to work, you got to do, you got to work, you got to do. There wasn't very much time to encourage, any outside type of thinking. Remember, according to the Bible, did Jesus spend some time in the desert? We know from the historical record that he may have gone and spent time with the Essenes, which is a religious cult that occupied and lived along the Sea of Galilee. Okay? That he was eventually baptized by John the Baptist, etc., etc. That's fine. But his radical views in terms of being able to overthrow the establishment, to be able to precipitate or lead or call for a revolution, would have placed him outside of the mainstream, outside of the norm. He would have suffered from people falling off from him, friends and family. And so to advance his cause, he would have gathered people about him, because he probably recognized very early on, I can't do this by myself. I need a few other people with me. But yet again, even with those people, even as he had collected his disciples around him, and he had great friends with Lazarus and Mary of Magdala and Mary Magdalene and all these other people around him, remember when he was in the Garden of Gethsemane, he cried out, Father, why have you forsaken me? That was for him the epitome, his loneliest moment, because he felt he did not know or have or anyone to turn to. That for him was his lonely moment. Okay? So I would suggest that yes, like many of us, even us who are gathered here, as well as those listening, all of us throughout history, we can go back and look at the writings of Gautama Buddha. Let's look at Muhammad's writings in the Quran or before, and see how they talk about that loneliness, being alone. Because what comes in that loneliness, and it's something that, if as a Jesuit I experience, is what is called the great doubt. And all of us at some point in time of our lives do experience a great doubt, where we doubt ourselves, we doubt our existence, we doubt our place in this world, and that of course spirals into paranoia and all sorts of other stuff. But it is called the great doubt. And that great doubt comes out of that sense of loneliness, that sense of, why am I alone? So it is, yes, it is likely that a historical Jesus experienced loneliness.
Thank you for that, Antoine. Michelle, did you want to respond, or?
No, I agree with him, and I'm also thinking based on that most leaders in leadership position, most people feel some sense of loneliness. However, if you are in, I don't want to say a stable mental space, but you should be able to understand that you can seek help and support. You can be vulnerable, and that is where you can show great leadership. I feel when I'm thinking about loneliness, I'm thinking about someone who has all the resources around them. people there to help them, people reaching out to help them, and yet they feel a sense of loneliness. I don't see it as where you're ostracized, you're alone, by itself. I also see it as something that occurs within a person. So we can all be on this panel, we're talking together, but I feel alone. I feel you're all against me. I feel you all don't like me. I feel, so I have to do this by myself. That's where I think the loneliness comes in. In terms of the Christ, yes, he was ostracized, which would make him feel lonely. But I am not 100% sure he experienced loneliness because he knew at a point to cry out to his Father. So he knew to seek some help.
Okay.
Andy, I'd like to pick up on what Dr. Luard was talking
Yeah, go
about
ahead.
a little bit in terms of picking up from the vulnerability part of it all, where each and every one of us do experience times when we feel vulnerable. And that is where our own inner strength or our own inner weakness is exposed. And so there is a connection between loneliness and vulnerability. And we have to be careful that in discussing loneliness, that we don't, or we think about the fact that each and every one of us needs persons around us to help us during these times, and for others to recognize that maybe Compton is in a vulnerable space. I need to help him. So we as individuals have got to be able to recognize those moments when the other person needs help, and to be able to lend a helping hand.
Okay. Thank you, Compton. I agree.
Yeah, but sometimes they don't take the help. So what we were addressing is, I see you need help. I offer support to you, but you still feel that way. You still don't want to take the help, So that's another.
But there's one other aspect of this which you raised, Dr. Lord, which I think is also pretty valuable, is that for leaders experience it a lot. And it's a sense of pride and inflated ego that comes with their positions as leaders. And so with with a combination of pride and ego, they don't feel that they have to ask for help. And so because of their pride and ego, they don't ask for help. And so it feeds into a cycle where they then experience tremendous amounts of loneliness. And that leads to despair. That leads to the paranoia that will evolve from that. And I agree, Compton, that an experience of loneliness is an experience of being vulnerable. And even if we recognize loneliness as someone being vulnerable, being lonely or experiencing loneliness, we would not know unless they verbalize it, unless they say it. And by saying it, I feel lonely, or I ain't really got nobody to talk to, When they say that, it is in an effect that they're saying, can you help me? Because then is when you need to pay attention and listen. When they say that, can I, I'm here if you need. Let me know how I can help you. Don't tell somebody what you think they should do, because that is the worst thing you can do. Just simply say, I am here. Let me know how I can help you. The other side to that is that someone who's experiencing loneliness, and I was hoping that we would get to this a little later, but any which way, if we look at the span, at an age span, the spectrum from young to old, what do you think are the two periods in a person's life, especially men, when they experience the most effects of loneliness? Anybody?
Well, I figure the first would be adolescence.
Go on.
Old age.
Old age. Thank you. Because in adolescence, they're still trying to figure out they're trying to figure out their hormones in their bodies, how the hormones are going to make them feel and think. They're still trying to figure out their masculinity, what does masculinity and what does manhood look like. They're still trying to figure out the bonds that they will create with others in their community, in their families. What do these bonds look like? What the social structures look like? And caught up in that maelstrom is all these collection of relationships and friends and acquaintances that they're trying to find a place and a point to identify who is real and who is not, who can be trusted and who cannot. So you go through all these tests and all these. So that person, a lot of young people are experiencing significant amount of loneliness. And this COVID pandemic has exacerbated that significantly with enormous amounts of stress, heightened anxiety, and various states of depression. But then we also have the older people. And I'm not just going to confine this to older men, but I'd also say older women. Because in our culture, there is a sense that when you get old and you're unable to produce, and here I come back to this thing. You remember I said, Andy, I'm going to link this back to laziness. Because our culture is so driven about production and getting things done that when you get into old age and you're not able to do as much, you are sidelined. You are shunted to the side. Okay? Check and see how many older people do talk about feeling lonely, even though they may be surrounded by lots of family and friends. But they still feel alone because they don't feel needed. They don't feel as though they have a contribution to make. They don't feel that that they have a place anymore in the family, in the society, in the community, because of age, because of some kind of medical disability or some kind of health issue or infirmity. So that now forces them into themselves. And they will sit in a chair and look out through the window. And just what are they looking at and for? Only God in His mercy knows. But they're in their minds. You understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, definitely. It's an important point, and I think we're going to get back to that whole thing of those stages, old age and so on. Now, Renita, looking back either at your school years or coming to America and starting your work life, those moments when you would have felt alone or felt lonely, was it something happening outside of you and around you, or was it something happening within you? You're muted.
The work that I do never really allowed me to be lonely in terms of being surrounded by folks. But the alone time that I felt would be like at Christmas, because your Christmas is a family holiday in Guyana, and like Christmas and birthdays when my parents weren't around, and my sisters, my siblings, I don't know if I felt alone, but I know I miss them. I miss them a lot during those times, right? So I think I had mentioned in the chat, is something wrong with me because I actually look forward to being alone and alone time and thinking and rejuvenating and stuff like that. So to the point when I get home, I just wanted to be alone, don't even want to answer my phone, so I don't know if there are categories of being alone and feeling alone, but I always felt that I never had enough alone time. So, like I said, when I initially came here, I used to feel a bit sad around Christmas and birthdays, but other than that, I guess because I have a lot of friends and stuff that and family that I reach out to and things like that. So I don't think I was impacted a lot and left alone to feel alone, to feel depressed, to feel sad, the negative parts of being alone. Because there are, to me, positive aspects of being alone. You get to think, you get to rejuvenate, you get to recollect, you get to reflect. Sometimes I think it's good to be alone. So I really don't know if I could really add value to that, because I always tell Jillian, I think something is wrong with me because I just like to be alone. So
All right, I might ask Antoine to give us his opinion in a moment if something is wrong with you, but we'll come back. We'll come back to that. Jillian, in coming to America, did you have that experience that some immigrants who have where you felt very alone, even though you may have been with family, but you felt very alone in coming to America. In the first few months, did you have that experience?
Not much, because when I came, most of my family were here. So I did not have that feeling of being alone. Most of my friends and family were here. So I had people that I could have connected with. When we're talking about being alone and loneliness, and I see it as two different things. Being alone, as Renita said, sometimes you're happy being alone in your own solitude. So I don't see being alone is a bad thing. Loneliness, when I think about loneliness, I think of not having meaningful relationships, people that you can turn to. Because when you're lonely, loneliness is that you have nowhere to turn to, nobody to talk to. So if you have meaningful, because we know a lot of people, we have acquaintances, you have friends, but do you have those meaningful friendships where you can just pick up the phone and call somebody when you're really feeling lonely? So for me, being alone and loneliness, I see it as two different things. Because as someone in the chat put, you can be alone and not lonely. You can be around a lot of people and still feel lonely. So for me, it's that connection that you may have with people, that you have somebody there that when you feel lonely. As I said, for me, when I came to America, it was the opposite. I came and met most of my family here.
Right.
So I had people to connect with, and I had that kind of relationship. So I did not feel that kind of loneliness that, we're talking about.
Dr. Blackman, I was reading somewhere where someone opined that the human, we generally define as social beings, but this person said, the socialization part really came about because of survival. We needed to come together in order to better survive, and that inherently we're actually solo beings, is that we prefer being alone. What's your take?
So that's interesting. I mean, it could be true, but I think what you said just kind of aligned with what Jillian just said about the difference between loneliness and being alone. And I think I wanted to go there, and then I'll come to this question about social and survival. You see, I think that's how I was sort of seeing it. It's kind of like, we desire, well, you're raising the question of why we desire these social connections, but the sense is that we desire certain social connections. This is the way it's come to us, and then we actually experience social connections. So it's like there's a set of connections that we feel we need in our head, and then there's a set of connections that we actually have, and the gap between between the set of connections that we feel we should have and the set of connections that we actually had is where the loneliness creeps in. And it can creep in a number of different places. So, the original question you asked about Jesus, I was thinking like, okay, how was the relationship between Jesus and his siblings? How was the relationship between Jesus and the parents? What was the level of the connection? How was the relationship between, Jesus and the friends? And I think that this is the thing that at least for me, this is where the loneliness from time to time will come. It's that there is an experience that you want to have and a connection that you want to have with other people. But in the working out of the life, you don't have this connection. You don't have this, you don't have this connection that you imagine that you should have. And then in these places, when you sit and you think about this connection, it brings a sense of dread to you, a sense of feeling that, you're in this world, in this particular thing all by yourself. And it's this kind of like mental thing that is this loneliness that I was aiming at, and which I think Jillian sort of, kind of made clear for me, which is that it's not the sense of being alone. I could be alone and just have my phone and I could see, connections on WhatsApp, connections on Facebook, connections on, telephone calls, emails. And so even though I'm going throughout, and Antoine talked about it in the context of the COVID and the stress and the anxiety that it induces. For a person with certain kinds of connections, even though I've spent the last year in a room most of the times by myself, I haven't felt lonely in the sense of not having a connection, because I've always had some connection, some place that I can engage. So I've been alone, but not lonely.
Not lonely.
But then there are other times when you're in a room full of people and you can't sort of somehow the communication, the connection that you need to feel with the room full of people. You're there and you're standing and you're watching everything and you're completely alone because there's no, the room is full with people but there's nothing that you can say or not say with them. So I always feel like this to me is the way I think of being lonely. Is this difference between like how you feel the connection should be and how the connection actually is. And it can occur at your workplace. It can occur in your house. Even, you're married for 20 years, you and your wife are sitting down and, something happens. And in that moment, even though the two of you are sitting in the house and you've been in the house together for 20 years, you feel completely alone because the connection that you need in this moment is not exactly the connection that you think you should have. Huh? And it's with your children too, this sort of sense of disconnect between, what we feel should be the case and what is actually the case. And I was interested in, and I think we'll go back there, Sir Anton, as as we, engage with, say, for example, our parents and, particularly as you just articulated, the question of as you get older, you're no longer working as much, you're no longer contributing as much to the thing. And then you feel, well, boy, you're bothering your children or you're bothering people, so you don't really want to engage them in a certain way. And so now you just fall into a loneliness in the house by yourself, even though you're there and you have children and you have all these people around you. You're there, but you're not really engaging in the way that you should. So I do think, I'm more in a way like as Jillian has defined it, that the loneliness is not about being alone. The loneliness is about, and the way I'm thinking of what she said was is like, you feel you should have something, and then your actual experience is far less than what you feel. and you're left with like a disconnect that makes you a little anxious and creates angst in you and creates a certain kind of dread in you. So that's my quick thought there, and then I'll come back later.
Okay.
If I may add, right? For me, being alone is like a physical aspect.
Yeah.
Alone to me translates to a physical. You're not around anyone. No one, you don't have anybody to reach out to and stuff like that. While loneliness to me is a state of being, an
It's a mental
experience,
thing, yes.
a psychological experience, right? You're feeling it, this loneliness. So that to me, that's the difference.
Yes, I
One
agree
is
with you.
physical, and one is a psychological
Kind of feeling.
experience.
Yes.
So that's what I'm saying. Right. That's the difference for me.
Yeah, I agree with you. That's my experience of the loneliness. Yes.
And Antoine, we need to ask earlier.
Andy,
Go ahead.
I just want to throw a little thing in here for us to think about. Where does Maslow's, and I know someone just refuted his theory, but where does Maslow's hierarchy of needs fit in? Because he is pretty much saying we need these things at the baseline. So where does loneliness and Maslow's, maybe Antoine can address that, where does it intersect?
Antoine, you want to go ahead?
So, two things to begin with. It might increase to more than two in a minute. Let us address the question of loneliness and being alone. And Jillian did articulate and separate the two. The two are two different states. But loneliness, as Dr. Blackman continued to build on and Renian continued to add, and I will add, loneliness is when you do not feel you belong. You do not have a sense that you belong anymore to anyone, and you are there by yourself. Okay? But let me address the concept of aloneness. I'm sure some of you may or may not be familiar with the Myers-Briggs personality test. Okay? The Myers-Briggs personality test has one of its elements is an introvert. So if you have come to that point in your life where you are able to understand who you are as a person, who, where, and how you belong, not just in your family, but in your community, in your society, and in the global world, where if you've come to understand who you are, and you understand that I enjoy being by myself, because for me, psychologically, being by myself is how I recharge my batteries, how I recollect, as Renian was saying, how I recreate, how I rejuvenate, this is how I recharge, by being alone. But it's different than being lonely, because still, someone who is accustomed to being alone and celebrates and enjoys being alone can also experience loneliness. Because as you all have described, is that it is also a state of mind. And that state of mind is relative to your surroundings, to your connections, to the bonds around you. Okay? Looking at Abraham Maslow's hierarchy of needs, there was a recent challenge to Maslow's hierarchy of needs, intimating that he stole that concept from the native Indians. And in fact, the native Indians' original perspective on a hierarchy of needs begins first with self-actualization.
Oh.
And then it moves up. So what Maslow did was he inverted it. he flipped it and made it his own. It is possible to consider in that hierarchy and I'm thinking now of the original hierarchy, which is what the native Indians used, beginning with the narrowest apex at self-actualization and then moving up towards a base or towards the broader aspect of the triangle, is that as you move up from self-actualization and you become more integrated and involved in your respective communities, that the opportunities for loneliness diminishes. That you may experience occasions of loneliness. Again, I go back to the big doubt, because even after you've experienced the big doubt and resolved the issues about yourself, your identity, who you are in the great doubt, you will continue to experience moments when you will question who you are, when you will question your purpose, when you'll question your relevance, when you'll question your sense of belonging. So it is normal. It is okay. You will have, but you have already learned how to resolve those issues. And you can then continue to move up the hierarchy and therefore satisfy the community, the society, the family that you belong. So an older person, for example, who may be tempted to slip into a sense of loneliness, which in a sense, if you want to think of it as a curse or a fog or, as a miasma, an older person slipping into that, who may have engaged in, while they in their years, as they matured, some degree of self-reflection, some degree of greater self-awareness, some degree of self-understanding oneself. All what I just said means all the same thing anyway, but all of that, then they will be better able to manage as they age, as they get older, to be better able to manage, because they will be able to find ways, even new ways, or rehashing old ways of reintegrating, in keeping connected. Okay? So let's talk about our Guyanese communities, for example. The older women will gather and they will sit down. And I was talking to somebody the other day, we were talking about country life. When you sit down and you got a flambeau with a Dutch bottle with a piece of cloth and some kerosene, and that's the only light you got, and you're there, and it may be a moonlight night, but you all sit down on the step. And your neighbor sit down on she step. And y'all exchanging and y'all talking and you're talking old time story. But as you exchange information and you share, you are doing a couple of different things. You are reinforcing bonds. You are sharing and keeping stories alive. Okay? But you're also maintaining the integration as an older person with another older person. So you're maintaining that structure. Because you are the lady next door. Y'all can take a walk and go by the market and see how fish selling. Okay? Y'all gonna get dressed up together and say, here is what color dress you wearing today? Or what hat you're wearing to go to church? So you develop those bonds and you strengthen them. You understand? When I bake a bread, I send over a bread for you. When you bake a sweet bread, you send over sweet bread for me. And we keep going like that. That may be one of the ways that we can begin to overcome that feeling of loneliness as we age. Because remember, again, there is a significant difference between being alone and loneliness, but you can still experience loneliness while you're alone.
Yep.
Does that answer all of your questions, Andy?
Yeah.
I would like to jump in here and go back to Dr. Lord's question about Maslow. I'm going to use the classical interpretation. And when one experiences loneliness using the Maslow's perspective, it means that those needs are not being met. In other words, this is where we're talking now in terms of the whole social structure and economics, where a person who doesn't have a roof over his head, who's hungry, those are the basic needs that Maslow is talking about. When you have those things, then you creeps in this feeling of loneliness, this need, this need that's unfulfilled. So that, in terms of, I'm linking the discussion with Maslow's classical theory and loneliness. So that's my contribution, Dr. Lord.
It's all right, Michelle.
I kind of agree to some extent. I'm wondering if, I feel that self-actualization is probably at the beginning, because if you feel some form of self-actualization, then you may not be lonely because you understand where to go and what to do, as against just food, water, and sex, because you can have those basic things and still experience loneliness. But I do not know the answer. And I just think it is something that we should think about when we're thinking about loneliness. We have these theories, and yes, it may be a mental state, but every mental breakdown should be impacted by, there should be a break somewhere, and we should be able to pick up where that break is. That's where my thinking is.
I think you hit it when you said self-actualization. To me, once you know yourself, you know your triggers, you know your breaking point, right? Once you know those things and you have a sense of security along with that self-actualization, you know what to go after and what to avoid, so that your equilibrium is not disturbed to a point where you could either go into this loneliness and depression, or be extra, like always want to be around people, the life of the party and stuff like that. So once you know who you are and you've achieved equilibrium within your being, I think that certain things may not really rattle you. As human beings, the only constant we know is change. So we should be constantly evolving, constantly reflecting on what could push us in the negative directions, what could put us into positive directions. And so to me, once you have accepted and you've attained self-actualization, then the rest is up to you. Are you going to let things push you to this part of the equation, or are you going to remain centered?
Can I just jump in here? Because I think Dr. Lord has introduced a concept that I would struggle with myself. Just now, I pointed out the two different age groups along the age spectrum. How do we then provide for an adolescent to become self-actualized as a starting point? You see where I'm going with this, Dr. Lord? Because we have been consistently conditioned and we operate from an inverted Maslow's hierarchy of needs, where the fundamentals are satisfied first and we build upwards. But then the original, according to the Native Americans, is that you begin at self-actualization and work towards satisfying the other needs. But how do we then help an adolescent to get to that point when an adolescent is still trying to figure out their sense of belonging? And we can still have some elderly people in our community who's still in survival mode. They're
So
even existing.
I think you just hit the hammer on the head, the nail on the head with the hammer, because
That
I
sounds
think
violent.
no, it's not violent, because it's the nail that is feeling the impact, not you. So I think you hit it on, for me it came home a little clearer, because initially we stated that the two groups of people that experience the most loneliness are teenagers and the elderly. Could it therefore be because teenagers are going through all these hormonal changes and all of that? We identified this earlier in the conversation. So could it be that because they're going through these things, they now they don't really have the coping mechanism to deal with how they feel? They get all these mixed emotions. Now, with the elderly, they would have gone through a period, and if they would have gracefully ascended through that hierarchy, then they would have more coping mechanisms to deal with it at the end. However, there are people who remain stuck throughout life at teenage years. Some people never got past high school. And for whatever reasons, then they have these gaps towards the end.
We also have to look at our elderly and our tradition. There's a lot of things that culturally, especially the females, they didn't reveal, they didn't discuss certain discussions we weren't allowed to have. They weren't allowed to have. So a lot of times they would just sit there with their masking and hiding their true emotions and their true feelings. And we will think, or they will behave different, crazy, and we wouldn't understand, that was their way of either masking or lashing out. So I think like Antoine pointed out, those two ends of the spectrums, they go through, like you said, a lot, especially the teenagers trying to identify and fit in who they are and who they want to be. And then the elderly, like a lot of like sometimes for me, there was so much that I wanted to achieve. I think I should have been so far ahead in some of my achievements and stuff like that. But you made certain sacrifices, you made certain decisions in order for to bring others up along with you. So when you have your time to reflect and stuff like that, you think about those things. But like my mom and my grandmother, I know they weren't allowed to, or they'd never really say how they felt about certain things. So they're also hiding their emotions. And I think that looking back, they had their stages of loneliness also. And their coping mechanism, I guess, was just to retain and not share.
But I believe earlier in our discussions previous night, we spoke about being able to achieve or attain a particular position. So I may have wanted to become the president of Guyana, and I may have worked as hard as possible to get here. But I could have become the president of Guyana and still feel that gap, still feel that different, still not feel that sense of self-actualization. So I am beginning to feel that there needs to be a level of balance in the human experience where we need to understand when to utilize courage, when to utilize an understanding of other people, when to go out and get things, when to build on what you have, and when to just enjoy and experience what you have, when to really experience love, experience understanding, rather than just be like that Miller that we explained earlier, just going, going, going. That's actually filling a void. When you have a void to fill, that's when you keep you're going. So you work 24 hours a day because you don't want to come home to your beautiful husband, or you work you don't want to do anything in the house with the children, or all kinds of different reasons. So you're looked at as a hard worker. What is that gap you're filling? Or you're continuing with your educational pursuit. We have some people who are professional students. What is that gap that you're filling? What is causing you to do this? And very often, because we have these taboos around mental health, we never really express it. We cover these things and we melt away within our being, and maybe become lonely, maybe lash out in another way, maybe do the things that we shouldn't do, which is not normal based on the laws of society. And we never really thought about it.
As a follow-up to Renita, masking is a form of self-protection where we use that for self-survival. And we know of many characters who are the life of the party, but that person, or they are lonely. We know of many persons in a society who are great comics, but then they became, had a tragedy and tragic ending. So we have to recognize that masking is a way of self-preservation. And then we have the question of unmasking the person. And that is the hard part. And that's where the mental health professionals will come in terms of trying to help this person who's always been hiding behind a mask so he or she can protect himself or herself from the hurt that's going on internally.
Okay, thank you, Compton. Terence, coming off of Compton's point there, we in terms of our behavior and how we deal socially, we tend to be put in two categories: introverts and extroverts. Can you recall, when those two terms actually had meaning to you in your life, and what would have led to you really sitting down and think about what is an introvert, what is an extrovert, and who you are?
Well, actually, Antoine mentioned this Myers-Briggs test. So part of the things that they do when they put you in some kind of management training. So you get the Myers-Briggs test, and then so I've had this Myers-Briggs test, and so I know that it has some things, but I know that I'm in the introvert category. So they have EMTJ, and there's some names that it has attached to it that tells you like who you are and so on. So I've done this test, but as I've been listening to conversation, I think what I take away, and I think this is what I'm Michelle and has been sort of driving this, and I think actually and Antoine and Jillian and Compton to a lesser extent is this sense of as I've been thinking here, is sort of what comes up, who am I? This is really the question, right? And so when you think in terms of your family, you think, okay, I'm a father, I'm a husband, I'm a son, and you think in terms of your community. Well, I'm a teacher, or this kind of thing, and you think in terms of your profession, and you feel like, and I think what's at issue here is how secure are you in these things? So if you're secure in these things, then you feel less lonely. This is essentially the truth. If you feel, if you feel secure, and in a sense this is reciprocated from the community and from the family and others, reflected from these things to you, then you feel very secure. And the place where this loneliness kind of becomes an issue is precisely around your lack of security about your particular place in some one of these things. And we have many places where we find this happening. I think it's maybe not sort of it's not an experience, for example, that would be a Guyanese experience, but quite often, for example, here in the United States, where if you're part of a profession in which your racial or ethnic group is underrepresented, when you're in the room, you're always looking around for other people in the room who are like yourself, and then finally, I remember I always have to tell a story. I remember there was I had two friends in graduate school, a guy named Nolan Bradshaw, who's from Trinidad, and another one named Mike Yomi, who was from the Cameroon. And Nolan and Mike were both in the economics profession, and so we, in the mid 90s, when they started doing a lot of math on Wall Street, so there was a big explosion of math finance. And I always remember the three of us drove all the way down to Boston University, and there was a big to-do, and so then we walk into the place, and then it's just the three of us, and we look around, there's no one else, like the three of us in the place, and in this moment we can't split up, because if we split up, things are not going to go right. So we're huddling together, we're taking coffee together, we're doing everything, and you could even as the three of us in a room of 200 people in a very professional setting, you could feel the sort of awkwardness. I mean, this is not the kind of thing that this social need that you have to be integrated into so this is not the kind of thing perhaps will be something that is frequently a part of the experience of someone in Guyana, but certainly for many of us here, we have this experience of in a professional sense, but after a while, and we've done something, people know us, we feel more secure in the room, and we're better able to express ourselves. So in a way, I as I've listened to the discussion tonight, I think I've come to a better understanding of the loneliness. The one other thing I wanted to kind of touch on, and I noted that someone touched on this in the chat. Might have been David, and so he sort of said about this question of technology and whether or not we have just gone through, and I think we haven't really thought this through, right? We have gone through, families and our children in particular, in terms of schools and so on. I mean, I've literally gone through a year where they've lived in their house. They've communicated with their friends, with everyone else, by way of a computer screen. And I don't think we know whether or not this is this, is this, to what is this technology doing, and this set of interactions doing in terms of, is it making our children more lonely? I mean, sometimes I'm in the house, my daughter's in a room. I might go for 2 or 3 days where we don't really, I see her, I come into a room and I close the door. We're in the house, but we're not, if it was different, going to school, you take her to school, you come home, so there's a way in which it's a kind of interesting intersection between, these questions of loneliness and self-actualization, and just this way in which, just this program that we're having right now, right? We're all in different parts of the world. We're having this conversation that is somehow mediated by technology. We seem to be friends. We seem to have a connection. We're not lonely, right? And we haven't fully sort of explored all of the dimensions of this thing. So, on one level, I feel like I come away from this with a nice understanding about, it's really around this question of who am I, how secure I am in the things that I'm doing. But I'm also seeing there are lots of other questions that are being raised around, these new ways in which we're, this Facebook, online videos, WhatsApp, all these various things that ping every day in our head. And, you know, are they good for us? Are they helping us are they keeping our mental state? Or maybe we should just withdraw from them all and, you know, just suck it up, go as far as we can go with our masks and, you know. So those are my two thoughts. Yeah, one thought around feeling I have a better grasp of what's happening with the loneliness, but I'm a little concerned about, you know, what the current way of in the world that we're in the world is doing to all of these things that we've been describing. You know, is it making us more secure? But certainly, I mean, I'm not so worried about me, but maybe I'm worried about the children more. You know, are they feeling connected to their community? Are they? I mean, you know, so when we went to school, we identified with schools and so on. Are our children similarly identifying with the school in the same way through the computer? Is this going to be good for them 5 years from now? What's the sense that's going on in their head? And should we be thinking about it, and how should we be thinking about it? I think, you know, that's a question that's emerging for me as I'm also listening to the discussion.
Are you thinking about their socialization skills if it's being impacted?
Yeah, I mean, you know, I mean, it's obvious. I mean, they've been in the house all the time. You're not even sure if they really understand what's going on. I mean, like you just talked, we mentioned these teenagers. I mean, what's the impact on teenagers who've been sitting in the house for the last, you know, 18 months? Well, sir, that's almost 18 months. I mean, things shut down in around about February, March of 2020, right? So we're come through March again, April, May. Now we're heading for June. So 12, 15 months. Right. We've been in this experiment.
Antoine, let's close off with Terence's point. And one of the viewers, David, he did bring it up, the whole impact of social media and how we socialize in at this time of our lives. Do you think that, you know, 5-10 years down the line that psychologists and psychiatrists will have a new menu of loneliness terms, of different forms of loneliness?
To answer your question, I think that will depend on how they see society is evolving. And the reason I say that is I want to just go back to something that Dr. Blackman was talking about just now, which was raised about technology, and especially for our young people. They had already pre-COVID-19, a lot of young people were already experiencing significant amounts of loneliness, significant amounts of disconnectedness because of technology and social media, because they were always by themselves. They were not making and affirming and reinforcing social bonds. Okay? When the pandemic hit, they became that loneliness, that sense of isolation becomes even more exacerbated. It became amplified. Okay? So indeed, I think your question about psychologists and psychiatrists being able to see a menu of other items that can help them in diagnosing and providing treatment for loneliness and on the attendant issues that come with that will depend in large part on how psychology and psychiatrists view the communities and the peoples that they're serving from a sociocultural perspective as a starting point. So right now, the APA, the American Psychiatric Association, is going through its own internal examination of how racism impacted mental health and mental health treatment for Black and people of color since the APA was founded in 1844. So the APA is in itself undergoing a self-examination, which may eventually lead to a redefining or a reimagining or a rewriting of the DSM. So it means in perhaps 5 or 10 years, the criteria to determine a diagnosis or to provide treatment or even to have a conversation about loneliness and the attendant issues that come with loneliness may be different. And I just want to go back a little bit to what I started talking about and jump again to something that Rennie and both Dr. Blackman and Michelle had raised, is that a lot of young people, when we are talking just now, Dr. Lord, about Maslow's hierarchy of needs and inverting the pyramid and beginning with self-actualization, somebody raised a question in the chat about hormones, about riding that dragon in our adolescent years or decreasing hormones in our elderly years, and how both states significantly impact our psychosocial health. What we do know now, research is telling us, is that particularly for men, we don't mature until about 40. The prefrontal cortex in our brains don't mature until we're about 40. So how do we then provide young adult men, or even more so, young Black men, with a sense of self-actualization when they're trying to ride that hormonal dragon? And how do we reconcile that with our elderly community members, especially if they're older and they're Black, who are now seeing diminishing hormonal levels that is impacting their sense of self, is impacting their mental health, is impacting how they see themselves in the community, in the family, in the home, to mitigate against that loneliness that they will feel? How do we help them with that? Then there's the other aspect to this that Renian raised just now when she talked about older women, for example, and the masks that we carry, how many older women hold on to things and they don't want to talk. Have we considered that the trauma, the experiences that many of us have lived with through our lives, that trauma that come from those experiences, baby, we don't want to talk about that shit no more.
Yeah.
We just want to just keep it quiet, because if we only open up our mouth to talk about it, we are afraid of what not only it would do to us, but what it will do to everybody around us. So we just keep quiet. Stand easy better than beg pardon. Okay? Because the trauma of any experiences that we may have had while we were on our way to adulthood, while we were on our way to becoming elderly, baby, I just gotta keep that shit quiet, because I can't. If I only open my mouth, it's not gonna be pretty. And I'm actually experiencing that in some of the older family members that I've come across, that they don't want to talk about stories. They need to talk about it, but they have not learned how to process the trauma. They have not learned how to process the experiences. So they keep it bottled in and they take it to their graves. And either it takes them or natural causes, and I argue the whole concept of natural causes then, take it to their graves. And we who are left don't know those stories. The last time I was with you guys, I asked you the question, how many of you know your story? How many of you know your own family story? The history that come down, that trauma that keeps passing on from generation to generation. How many of you have had your older family members tell you, discuss with you what life was like for them when they were young? What was going on? What were some of their experiences? And how those experiences formed and made them into who they are
Today.
or who they were and who you then become. So that when you experience that loneliness, what is that loneliness a continuation of? What is that loneliness a trade? So for example, when an older person takes their life, we ask the question, what happened? Why? But did we ever stop for a minute to understand that perhaps that older person may have had unresolved issues all of their lives? That at one point now, it's anything, because the rate of suicide in older men, for example, is highest between after 55. Okay? And we know that according to the US CDC, 4 times more men take their lives than women. 4 times more women attempt suicide than men, but 4 times more men complete it. But what I'm saying is, and it usually older men after 55 take their lives. Why? What issues were unresolved? What traumas were they dealing with? What, for example, is, as many of us are getting older and we start to think about retirement, what does retirement look like for us? How does retirement either enable or facilitate loneliness? Because we are not going to be maintaining that routine that we did for so many years. We're not going to be seeing the same people. We're not going to be doing the same things. So many of us say, okay, I'm tired now. I'm going to retire. But retire to do what? Oh, I'm not going to do anything. I'm just tired. I just want to rest. But after a while, you're now breaking a routine of habits that you've been doing for 30, 40 years. What are you going to do now? And so many people get into that age of retirement, and nature abhors a vacuum. There is nothing they have planned to do in their retirement. And they get thrown on themselves. They see themselves as no longer efficient, necessary, needed, not productive. They don't want to see themselves or consider themselves as burdens to their families or to anybody. They've got all sorts of health issues going on that also impacts their mental health. So when a man takes his life at 65 or 70, what were the issues that were going on in his life that remained unresolved? When he stopped working, when he retired, did he have anything to keep him occupied? Did he have a social network to keep him going? Does that make sense?
Certainly. All right. Well, time has run out on us. As always, there's so much still to be said, so much left unsaid, but I know we all got something from this evening's discussion, and I trust that all who are listening to us also got something from it.
May I offer before you wrap up that going forward, I would like us to really discuss the teenage issue, loneliness and the teenager right now in terms of COVID-19, and whether the impact of an elderly family member who does not believe in technology, how does that impact the students? Because I think that may also be a contributing factor into how the children, whether or not kids feel lonely, because we tend to take the only thing they have, which is their devices.
But I also want to jump in another thing here too. And you kind of hinted at it, Dr. Blackman. We are sitting in New York City, and there is an assumption that we've got everything and we are good and we are so forth. But let's think about people in Guyana who may not have what we have, who may not have the types of access and resources that we can call on here. And even though we are here, some of us can still be lonely. But think about those in Guyana, like up in the Quarantine or down the Berbice River, okay? Who do not have access, who may not even have electricity, for God's sake. And there are, as a matter of fact, there are actually studies that have shown that right here in New York State, there are communities without electricity and running water. So the United States is not all that, that's a whole nother conversation. But how do we step away from this assumption that because we are in the global north, that we have it better? That in fact, maybe somebody who living on the other side of the train line in Belfield or the other side of the train line on Myconia, Mahaica, or Barry Creek might be content with their life. How many of you can remember looking up at the night sky and seeing the outline of the Milky Way and seeing the imagery of the stars and enjoy that sense of, I am part of that, I am not alone, I belong to a larger cosmos? I just thought I'd bring a little bit of hope into all of this very deep,
Right. All right, you wanted to quickly address Michelle's question with regard to the youths and.
Well, it's interesting.
I think we should leave it for another night.
I don't want to have a conversation on that now.
Okay, cool.
That it wouldn't be because that's a separate subject matter area. And just to maybe do a plug is that my organization, we're doing our conference this year on young people. So it's youth mental wellness, resilience in uncertainty. So we're looking at youth mental wellness between 13 and 29. And we're looking at not just how they coped with the pandemic, but what does life look like after the pandemic for them?
Okay.
So right. Share it on our page, share it so that we can virtually attend your conference.
It's free as well.
Right, so share it.
Okay, thank you. Renita, you can take us out. Oh, by the way, Terence had a drink for you last week.
Happy birthday.
He had a drink for your birthday last week.
Thank you, guys.
We were trying to indulge in the happy birthday song, but we were strongly discouraged.
Right, yes.
Which version of the happy birthday song y'all was singing? The depressing one or the Stevie Wonder version?
No, David. David said he would sing.
Oh, I was hoping it was the Stevie Wonder or 50 Cent.
Yeah, because the traditional version is very depressing. There is nothing celebratory in that.
That would put me into loneliness.
Girl, don't start nothing now.
Anyway, guys, first of all, I'd like to apologize for my tardiness. And again, this was a very insightful conversation that, like you said, it always makes you step back and reflect and think, So I would like again to thank everyone for their time. Dr. Michelle and Dr. Terence, thank you so much. Antoine, I know you were very busy. You're in demand. So we always thank you for giving us your time and sharing your knowledge and experiences with us. Compton and Jillian also. Jillian, I know you're extremely busy being an entrepreneur. You found the time to come out and encourage me to come. So thank you very much. Compton, thank you so much. All of the viewers and the ones who text and shared their information and opinions, we thank you very much for spending time with us tonight. Andy, thank you so much again for hosting, and we see you all next week. Please stay safe. Thank you very much.
Goodbye.
Thank you again.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
You
Good
too.
night, Tony.
What is knowledge? And how much of it must we acquire in order to better our lives? What makes some forms of knowledge seemingly more advantageous than others? What fuels this desire to learn and to know and to understand? And how much of what we learn is actually applied to the bettering of our lives? Is it necessary to know in order to grow? Join us, a group of former Guyanese high schoolers and our special guests, as we chat about the things we need to know and about education and the process of learning in the tech age. This is The Trending Mind. Friday evenings at 7:30